Welcome back to the Keep Going podcast. I'm your host, Vin Kennedy, and today we have a special guest. This is Matt. Matt, would you like to do a brief intro on yourself?
You bet, man. Thanks for having me. I'll give you the quick 30,000 foot, and then we'll go wherever you want to go, man.
Sounds good.
I always tell people I'm a career educator because I learned the game of school, and I couldn't stay with that, right? And so when I say educator, I don't just mean K through 12. I mean career educator in terms of how can I help people get to their version of sovereignty and freedom in all aspects of their life, because the majority of people refuse to do that. They go by what somebody else wrote for them. Somebody else wrote the script and they put them in there. Maybe he's even a background actor in their own script, and they're just content to go with that. And so my entire mission and the entire mission of our organization is to break those chains, get people out of the cage, and let them go write the script for themselves. So that started, really when I was working at Stanford University. I got to see the game from the inside out there. Was a public school teacher, public school administrator, became a private school teacher, then a private school administrator. Ultimately left all of those because there was no way, once I understood the conveyor belt schooling model, there was no way that my own kids were going to do it, nor could I be a part of it anymore. So as I left those, I simultaneously organically started a speaking career, working with Fortune 500s around the world, coaching and consulting and speaking on stages, a lot of keynotes to about 500,000 people at this point. And I was working with them to find out what they weren't seeing from the young people that they wish they were. And so I was bringing that back to the schools that I started building. So I had a chance to launch a few schools of my own in California. Have since helped entrepreneurs launch a couple of hundred of these around the world, and then partnered with my friend Tim Kennedy, very close to your name.
As you say, not related.
Yeah, not related. And Tim and I, and a lot of listeners probably know who Tim is for good reason. But Tim and I decided to launch the Apogee Strong mentorship program to do a little extra pouring into young men. We now have a men's program as well. We're launching a women's program, and the men and women who go through our program have the ability to affiliate with us as we go forward to launch more schools that are very like-minded. So that's a whole heck of a lot right there. But it basically boils down to I'm never hurting for something to do.
Yeah. That's awesome, man. And obviously there's real passion there, and that's kind of what sparked all of it. But what was like the initial, I know you said obviously like you saw the school system almost as like cogs in a machine, but what was your real turning point as far as like, I need to step out of this and do something else?
Yeah, there were a couple of big things that happened, and then one not as big, but it was like the turning point. So as I was working in the public sector, it was all these slow revelations, right? Like I grew up knowing the game. And by knowing the game, I mean I got straight A's, but I didn't do any work for it. I just knew how to play school. So I knew how to be good at school, but I knew I wasn't doing anything. I knew I didn't have anything to offer. So I had always kind of known this. Then I'm at Stanford and I see, okay, wait a second. The admissions thing we're told is this meritocracy really isn't. There's a game going on here. Okay. Going into public schools, I saw what I was doing to be effective with young people, but I was also being told to do something different. I'm like, well, that's a problem. Then the next step going into administration, I'm like, okay, I can do something from the site level. I'm like, wait a second, I actually have less power now as an administrator. It's more, right? So I'm seeing all these dominoes are starting to fall. So that's ultimately why I started going, okay, well, what is the why? Why does school look like this? So one of the big moments was diving into asking that question and finding the work of guys like John Taylor Gatto, who brought to light why school looks this way. And once you see who brought it here and why it looks this way, you go, oh, wait, this is actually an attack on the population. That's what this is. So those are one of the big things where I'm like, okay, well, I can't, integrity wise, I can't do this. Right. So that was one of the big turning moments. Obviously, having my own children who are going to be growing now and have something, I've got to be able to provide for them. That was a huge turning point. And then sitting in the parking lot one day after running up the private school I was running, realizing that most private schools are just public schools in disguise. I read a book by a gentleman who's now a friend of mine named Seth Godin, and it was called Stop Stealing Dreams. And it just solidified it for me. It was the nail in the coffin. I just went, cool, man. I went in the next day and was like, hey, I'm done. I'll finish out this year and I'll be quiet about it, but I got to go build something of my own.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And it's funny, man. I'm 28.
Yep.
again, I personally don't think anybody's got it figured out. I think we're all trying to navigate this,
Mhm.
and whatever that looks like for an individual is what that looks like for an individual. But I talk to a lot of people my sister's age who are, 22, 23, and they're graduating from college. And exactly like you're saying, you've been told and given this map this whole time of playing school, playing college. And now you get out and these people fall into these 9 to 5 jobs that most people aren't happy, and it's the reality, and they've never seen another outlet. You've been told what to do, you've been fed, this script basically of what you have to follow, and now you're in the real
Right.
world and you're unhappy and you have no direction, and now you're not being told what to do.
That's exactly right. And it's people don't realize that that's the hidden danger. A lot of people will talk about the agendas that are playing out in school, right? And you get all the LGBTQ, PG, all that kind of whatever that is. All you get all that stuff. Yes, great. I get that that's an agenda that you've that you're not excited about. Yes, that can be a problem. Yes, we have all the gender issues. Yes, we have all of the um we got these broken homes, we got school shootings happening for all kinds of, yes, we have all of these things are a mess. The underlying hidden attack, though, is the majority of schools, people think everything's fine. And the system of school itself is meant to do exactly what you just said, is to create adults who are miserable and looking for their next direction. I work with so many adults at this point who are like, just tell me what to do. And I'm like, well, I can give you a general map of how to get self-confidence and self-awareness and get some resilience. But at the end of the day, your education, your accountability, it comes back to you taking the step forward. But the bravery has been stripped out of them, and they will just acquiesce to, okay, whoever the biggest authority is and tells me what to do and when to do it, right? That's the habit that is built in school that almost never goes away for most people. It's a religion in that way.
It's so true. And if you want to just kind of touch on like the difference between your schools that you build, and that's with Apogee, and just a traditional, private or public school.
Yeah, that's a good question, man. So the on we don't put academics on a pedestal. We understand academia is a small part, but we let people self-direct that, get to it when they get to it, because we're looking at developmental levels. Schools go against human development. No 5-year-old young man should be sitting down being forced to learn how to do academic like, it's actually not how we're designed at all. So you've got these academic levels that are, these general kind of a 0 to 8, 8 to 12, 12 to 16, 16 to 24, 25 and older are the general blanket-ish levels of development that we go through as humans. So we're getting back to the factory settings of following along with those. The academia that gets incorporated goes into wherever it makes sense to go into, but we're more leaning towards real responsibility and a microcosm of the real world. So the young people are having really in-depth conversations. They're thinking through, they're reading classics, they're having great conversations, they're looking at current events, and they're having conversations that put them as the protagonist in the story. So what would you do if? What would you have done if? We're giving them reps in that regard. We're giving them projects that allow them to solve interesting problems. But it's part of it is exposure, but part of it is having the real learning that takes place with having to collaborate with other people, having to actually hit a deadline on something and try to produce something that then you end up having to inevitably scaffold all of this knowledge while you're trying to create what you're creating. So they're also taking on roles and responsibilities. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we want them running the school. We want them teaching the youngers. We want them being the chef on campus who has had to learn how to cook, and now they're responsible for getting all the meals out to the other students. We want them being the ones that are running things. We also focus on the physiology and physicality of things. We talk a lot about mental health now. That's a trendy thing to talk about, mental health for young people. Well, cool. Physical health is the precursor to mental health. So if we're stripping all the free play, we're stripping all the physical education out of schools, then we're feeding people prison food, and we're encouraging garbage and snacks that are trash, and we're making them have to be overly medicated and overly jabbed and all this kind of stuff. We don't actually care about the mental health. So we go the opposite in that. Physical fitness is a non-negotiable. When we bring in mentors who are the best of the best of the best, it's not a teacher who is trained to perpetuate a system. It is, let's bring in a jujitsu teacher who that's what he does. He does jujitsu. So he will show you jujitsu because that's his thing. We'll bring in, somebody who is a musician to show you how to play music if you are desiring to play music. So it's a combination of all those things that is never easy to describe in a 30-second elevator pitch, because it's a microcosm of the real world is what it is. And people don't get that kids can operate in that.
Yeah. I mean, basically what you're doing, you're building entrepreneurs and you're building self-development and self-growth. And it's funny because I think it
Relationship
goes hand
is.
in hand. And yeah. And I hear it all the time though. It's like, your 20s don't matter, but what you're doing is changing that completely because every step matters. And now you could start that development at such a younger age that you're so ahead of the curve.
That's what it is. And the crazy thing is it's considered to be alternative because we've grown up in this world of school put in front of us. The reality is we're getting back to the factory settings. We're getting back to what it actually always looked like. It used to look like you grew up on the farm and you had to work on the farm. You had a bunch of chores very early, very often. You took on a ton of responsibility. You were an apprentice, for whatever your mom and dad did, maybe, and you are starting to help run the family business at 10, 11, 12. All right. And then you were getting married at 16 and you were starting to raise kids. You had your own business you were operating. That used to be the way it looked. Our DNA has not changed from that. Our expectations have changed. Right.
Yeah.
The opportunities for distractions have come about. Like all of those things are what's changed. Our ability hasn't changed.
Yeah.
And so we're getting people back to realizing that. And when they do, and they embrace that, life looks extraordinarily different. It's not weird for me to say that we have horses because my daughters bought horses. My daughters bought them when they were 9 and 7. How many
Yeah.
adults feel like they're qualified or have enough money to buy a friggin' horse? My kids were
Yeah.
9 and 7 when they bought their horses, the first ones, right? Like
Yeah.
they're capable, man.
Absolutely. And so when was the first school built?
So I connected with a network of schools called the Acton Academies first. Apogee schools we're kind of a spinoff. We're taking everything we loved there. We're adding in our own elements. Of Tim. Do you know who Tim is? My business
I
partner,
do.
Tim.
Yes,
Okay,
definitely.
so he and I come up from, we have similar backgrounds, and so we have similar intentionality towards the physicality and the specific mentorship, and so we're building that out. That's a little different. I helped him build Apogee Cedar Park as well, which started out as part of these Acton Academies. So the first Acton actually was the Acton MBA program that started in the early 2000s, but the first Acton Academy was launched like 2011, 2012, and it's not a franchise. It's a network of people who want to do something different. I launched my first one in 2017, but have launched close to help launch. I've launched 3 in particular on that side, help launch. We've had a couple hundred since then around the world. And then, we've got Apogee Cedar Park on our side, and we're launching probably 5 or 6 more under the Apogee umbrella in 2024.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And I really ask because, like you said, like this is looked at as the alternative, right? And I think it's just a matter of time until the kids that graduate your schools enter the real world and have enough time to make real impact. And it'll be the drastic change that I think our society really needs.
It's crazy, man. And we're gonna need to have a lot of them, because we can already see, like I've had students at our campus walk off stage. I've had 17-year-olds with 6-figure job offers, right? And working 6-figure jobs that had, hey, by the way, degree required, while they were still in high school. So there's a way to go around a lot of that kind of stuff, right? So the proof is already in the pudding. These guys are already happy, handling this. But I had a parent at at a graduation. This is how deep the conditioning runs. Her son was 18. He was walking off stage to a career level position, making about $80,000 a year, overseeing a bunch of college graduates, working for a nationwide company that had never, until that point, with over 1,000 employees across the nation, hired anybody without a college degree. They made the first exception for him, and they put him immediately into this leadership position. And the mom says to me, "Oh gosh, yeah, but it really worries me." I said, "What worries you about this whole thing?" "Well, I just wish he would go to college." "Why do you want him to go to college?" "Well, so that he can get a good job. He has something to fall back on." So what the hell do you think he's walking into right now?
Right.
Right. But the
Yeah.
conditioning runs that deep. So it's going to take, just these endless amounts of stories over a long period of time, because we have conditioned ourselves as a society to fall in line with the religion of conveyor belt schooling. So we're going to need a lot, but we're making the shift.
Absolutely. How did you personally combat that conditioning? Like, how did you
Mhm.
uncondition what we're accustomed to?
Yeah, you know, for better or for worse, I think there's a little bit of a of that DNA is in there, but it started really, really young for me with, you know, I always tell people I'm really, really good at a couple of things. I suck at everything else, but I really lean into what I'm good at. And one of the things I've always been good at is recognizing patterns, whether that's in society, whether that's in people. I've always seen that, and I saw it very early. So there was always something in me, and I can there's very specific steps in my mind where I'm like, school's a game. I learned it I figured it out at 4 years old. I remember thinking, okay, there's a game going on here. At 8 years old, I realized I could play the game extraordinarily easily and just focus on other things that I wanted to go have more fun in, because this game I had figured out. um, Early teens, I had figured out that most people, not just kids, adults, just basically lived in fear and did what other people told them to do. I figured out that most of them were not ever truly happy and were never committed enough to figuring things out and would never question anything. Right. So I started figuring these things out, and I always resolved to do the opposite. That was just really a big part of how I always saw the world. Was I was going to remain curious. I was going to keep asking why, and I was really committed to optimizing as much as I could optimize. And that's only strengthened as I've gotten older and got kids. I think optimization is, you know, you can't be perfect. There's no such thing as a perfect person, a perfect father, a perfect husband, but why not pursue it? Why not pursue perfection and optimize where we can optimize? Like, I just, you know, we get one life, man. It's this human experience. Why don't we make it as freaking great as it possibly can be? I can't wrap my mind around the mindset of people who don't want to do that. Which for a while I was like, oof, that's going to make life tough. Right. I was like, I battled like, God, I know my mindset is different on this. Maybe I should just kind of go with the flows because it's going to cause a whole lot less stress. And that's garbage. And I push myself through that. So, you know, now I'm just looking for other people that have the same kind of mindset. And I don't, and I know it's not going to be a lot. But that's all I'm looking at. That's why Tim and I get along so well.
Absolutely. And I think it comes down to that fear, right? People are scared to go against the grain. And I think what you have right behind you is actually like the Teddy Roosevelt quote, the man in the arena. And that's it. It's just being in the arena, being okay with understanding that people outside of the arena could criticize you. It doesn't matter. You're in the arena. You're the one doing the thing.
That's right. That's why we always tell our guys, man, our men, our young men, it's fire, aim, ready. Everybody wants to do ready, aim, fire. No, it's fire, aim, ready. You get in and you go and you start doing. And by doing, you fail at most things. You succeed at some. You learn from both. And then you take the next step forward. And now you've got a little bit narrower of an aim. And then you fail and you succeed, and it allows you to narrow it a little bit, take another step forward, right? And you just keep doing that in perpetuity. That's the way it
Yeah.
actually works.
Absolutely. And something you touched on earlier that I just think is awesome is the way I've heard how you speak about how you raise your household, how you raise your children, your
Yeah.
relationship with your wife. If you kind of want to get into that, because earlier you definitely touched on the I believe you said 6 and 9 year olds buying horses. So I'm sure people are intrigued of what that means exactly.
Yeah, my kids are out working right. I can see them from my office right now. They're out here working on the farm right now. We live on a we live on a farm right now, and the beauty of living on a farm, that was an intentional move. We didn't grow up on farms, and we grew up in the friggin' city. My wife and I grew up in the Bay Area of California. Like, we were city kids. But they're out working. We wanted them to have the opportunity to take on more responsibility and more challenges. So my kids are, at the time of recording this, are 12, 10, and 7, two girls and a boy. And their day, you know, they get up and they've got a very almost a strict schedule that they've helped design, right? So as a family, we're on a mission together. We've got a set of rules that we have put together, that this is just what the Beaudreaus do. This is who we are. This is how we see the world. This is how we show up in the world. This is how we operate in the world. That contract is everything for us because it allows us to hold each other accountable. That doesn't mean just mom and dad holding them accountable. It means they can also hold us accountable. If they see us breaking the contract, they have to go, hey, rule number 6, dad, no complaining. Fix it. You sound like you're complaining right now. What's your solution? Yeah, you're right. Okay. Yeah, I got to find a solution for this. Otherwise, I need to shut up. Right. Like, when there's that kind of trust and that kind of a relationship, we can actually be on this mission and on this adventure together. And that's the way we look at our lives, is that we are on this mission and on this adventure together, and we live through that. That's kind of our code, right? That's our household code. And so within that, we've got all the freedom in the world to explore who we are as well. So, we all get up, we all have our jobs to do. We all have our things we're doing on the farm. I obviously have things in the business. My wife runs the farm side of the business, and my kids are a part of both of those things. That's part of their education, is understanding what we do. All parents, your kids are becoming who you are. You can't say you want something for them if you refuse to be it yourself. You have to be it yourself first. So my wife and I are leading by example by taking care of our responsibilities, building out our businesses, continuing to move forward, and bringing them along. So they help on the businesses, they help on the farm, they self-direct their own academics, but then we're diving into books and we're having challenging Socratic conversations in the home. And then they'll tackle, some different projects that all kind of throw out there to them. So different projects, different challenges that they'll tackle during the day. They're building out their own businesses, and then they take on their own experiences. One is still in love with horses, and she's got a business working. She's 12, and she does her own horse lessons, but then she also teaches other people about riding, teaches families about riding. Will go travel all over the state and have these overnight camps where she's working and teaching other people how to do this kind of stuff. My 10-year-old, gymnastics is her thing. So she's on competitive gymnastics. My little man is kickboxing and doing Ninja Warrior stuff. So they have those experiences that they're tackling to fill their own souls as well. When you have the freedom and openness and responsibility to do that, and they're not being distracted by a bunch of other crap. My 12-year-old is also 300 and something pages into the book she's writing. My 10-year-old, her book is at about 200 pages. My little man has no desire to write a book right now, and I don't think that's ever going to be his thing. Cool, that's fine. But they're getting the opportunity to learn who they are through this. They're not being distracted by a bunch of other crap. And they're the happiest kids I know because of it. They're the most mature, and they're the happiest. There's so much joy, man, because they're on a mission.
Yeah. It sounds like they have fulfillment and purpose at such a young age, which is kind of like a complete intangible. Like, and
Bingo.
something that I would think, I have a nephew, and that's honestly why all of this kind of has been hitting more for me, because a lot of people would obviously wonder, 28-year-old single male, like, why do you care? Which, at the other end of this, it really matters. Like, our youth
Yes, sir.
is so important. I think it's overlooked. Um, but yeah, I wonder, like, I run a lot. I run marathons. I do ultra marathons, and
Nice.
I would love for my nephew to run or play baseball. And how do you kind of navigate cultivating their purpose without forcing them into a purpose?
Yeah, you have to be inspired first and foremost, right? Like I've got to be the chief inspiration officer. So I've got to be living with a purpose for them to see the power of a purpose. And that's always first. And that's honestly, that's 80% of people's issues. That's where it stops right there, is because mom and dad aren't living with a purpose. So their kid never finds one because they've never had the example anyways. 80% of the
Right.
issues fixed right there. So me having a purpose and talking about what that is and what that looks like, and mom being the same, that's first and foremost. Then we point them to other people who have purposes as well, right? I cultivate my network extraordinarily, like with a fine tooth comb, right? And so they're exposed to other humans who are also living with a purpose. They're not exposed to people that aren't. Like that's just the people in our circle, the people in our network live this way. And then we expose them to other stories that have heroic thinking involved, whether it's a fictional work, a classic work, or whether it's something nonfiction. The stories are about heroic thinking, people going after something, doing something, serving others, living with character and honor and values. Like those are the stories that they're exposed to. Those are the movies they're exposed to, are things with heroic thinking involved. Those are the conversations we have. And then the elimination of the distractions is a huge piece too. Because one of the things that's, some of the dangerous stuff that we've got now available, we have so many distractions available. And one of them that I always rail against and people get fired up, but it is what it is. Video games. Video games are amazing. They're designed to suck you in. They're designed to take you on an adventure. They're designed to check off the boxes that are inside our DNA. Our young men are designed to want to search for purpose. And there's an element of a fight in there. There's an element of a battle, of conquering something, of rescuing the princess, of just getting after it, of collaborating side by side with another guy. Here we go. Video games do a great job of checking off all of those in a safe environment. And the rest of the world, they turn the noise down because they're like, I've already got that checked.
So true.
Get rid of it, and they'll go find it in the real world.
Yeah. So it's funny because I think video games develop into Netflix, which develops into becoming almost like a weekend warrior as far as like you go out, you drink, you come home, you watch Netflix.
Yep. You go watch that and you waste your damn time there. And then you want to go, a lot of these, and I got, look, I have friends that do these. I've done stuff like this. I've got friends that run these kind of companies, but like guys will go, okay, as long as now I'm going to get back into doing hard things. And so they'll go run the marathon, and that's freaking fantastic. It's great. But if that is your thing, and then the rest of your life, you're just sitting there and you're the bystander, well, you're tricking yourself.
Yeah.
Because what you do consistently every single day is what actually moves the needle more than the big hairy ass goal. That's the thing that moves the needle. So you're right. And so people acquiesce, and we want this virtual world. I'll go do one thing that I can hang my hat on, and then I'll sit and get into this virtual world. I'll go, the video games are a virtual world. The Netflix is a virtual world. Pornography is the virtual world. Why do I need a woman? I've got all the women in the world right here at my fingertips, right? Like we get sucked into all of these distractions that take us away from actually doing anything.
It's so true. And like you're saying, it's like people use bigger goals like a marathon to run the marathon. Okay, now I get the break instead of process is what's changing you. The process is what's forming you.
Bingo. It's that,
Yeah.
man. All the men that, the men that we serve and that Tim and I mentor in this program, that's every month they've got big projects. They've got big challenges. They've got big goals. Every month is a different focus. They've got all these things to do. They've got these readings to tackle. They have these things that are geared towards making them level up. But the reason we make it for 12 months is because we want them to develop the consistency and the habits of becoming people who just tackle those kind of things all the time. And the underlying part of all of that are their daily habits that we have them implementing as well. And it's the daily habits, they'll tell you, these little things done well every day forever, that have the biggest shift in their finances, in their marriage, right, in their relationship with their kids. It's those little things. And then the next layer of, okay, now we're leveling up all of these things, right? All those big hairy things are awesome. But if all of those other little tiny intangibles aren't being hit, you're not gonna meet your potential.
Yeah. And I'd be really curious to hear because it kind of all goes hand in hand. Your take on like the current dating world and dating apps. Just I
Yeah.
know it's probably a question you don't often get, but I'm curious because it kind of
Yeah.
all is mine.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And that is it is a question that I don't know if I've ever been asked that. I get to do 5 to 10 podcasts a week as a guest, which I'm very, very thankful for. But I don't think I've ever been asked that question. So I actually really like it. And I don't know how I can speak to it from a little bit, right? But I will admittedly be speaking to it from a place of, there's a little bit of a place of ignorance in there too, because I can honestly tell you, I've never even spent time, I've never used one, but I've also not spent time really going through like I don't even really know how they operate and what they look like.
Right.
I get the general idea from people's conversations, right? But I've never actually seen it. So, one of the things that when I did, as I was traveling around and doing all the keynotes, I have dialed that down as much as I possibly can. I'll still do a handful every year, but I'm no longer doing, 70 a year like I was. But I was working with a research firm based out of Texas, and they looked at generational trends and generational behaviors, right? And how do different generations see different things? How are they raised? How does that impact how they view the world, interact with the world, interact with each other, interact with various products, interact with various trends? And the firm did a really good job of defining generations actually based on behaviors, not just birth years, right? So looking at behaviors. And so one of the things they started to see in these younger generations, which, we can say Gen Z, there's going to be a kind of a break now because of COVID, right? So you'll have Generation Alpha or whatever they call the next generation that comes after that. But Gen Z in particular was the first one to grow up where dating apps were kind of always there, right? And everything from these technological distractions had always been there. So I grew up in this weird world where everything was able to be customized to your liking. Everything was kind of recommended for you, right? Like, how do you know what you're going to watch next on YouTube or Netflix? Well, there's the recommendations right there. It tells you what you're going to watch next. All right. You need a ride. You know, boom, I hit it on my phone and a ride shows up. I need food. Boom, delivered. I need new clothes. Click, delivered. I need a new boyfriend or a girlfriend. Swipe, delivered. Right. And so you get into this weird world. So from this outside perspective, I do think I don't villainize the app. It can be a way for people to meet. I know couples that are extraordinarily happy, but I don't think it should take the place of the actual courtship part of it, right? Like where you actually do have to still pursue. You can't just slide into her DMs. Like I think there's something to be said for having to actually still pursue, to have conversations, to, grab a pair of balls and go up and talk to somebody. We substitute that where it's like, oh, I got my app. There's a beautiful girl over there. I really want to go introduce myself. Let me see if I can find her here. Like to me, we're missing out on a lot of opportunity for growth in that regard. So, I think I'm kind of torn on the good and the bad. There probably is some good, but I'm glad I'm not having to date in this environment, truly.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's definitely a good way to look at it. I
Yeah.
think it is tough, and you're right. It's creating comfort, and that's what all of this is, right? The simplicity of just clicking and having access at your fingertips.
Yeah. I can't, we don't grow that way. It's like doing a virtual push-up. It's
Right.
not the same as doing a fucking push-up.
True. It's so
Like,
true.
do the push-up. Like you get the
Yeah.
benefit from actually doing the push-up. I think in a lot of ways, these comforts that we have, again, I'm not villainizing all these comforts, but I think we need to look at them for what they are and still be willing to, okay, what's the good? What's the bad? I just want to use it for the good. And I'll still put in the work where I need to put in the work.
Yeah. Definitely have to vet how you use it for sure.
Mm.
And something else that I was talking to a friend about is how do you like create strong children, but at the same time, like obviously you don't want to coddle them totally, but they need to fail, right? So like how do you
Yeah.
work that balance in?
Yeah, that's a really good question, man, because people um, have a weird view of what creating strong kids means, what failure looks like, their thoughts on failure. Like we talk about it, but people have a really skewed view of it. And again, I go back to the factory settings kind of deal, right? Like um, when kids learn, I always use this example, like when kids are learning to walk, nobody teaches them how to do it. It's innate, right? They want to do it. And so they've seen other people do it and they want to get there and they're starting to developmentally grow and they're like, "Ooh, I want to do that too." So they pull themselves up on the couch and they start sliding along and eventually they turn and they start to take a step and they wobble and they fall on their ass. What they just did was they failed at walking. They failed at it. What the parent does in response is like, "Yay, yes, way to go," right? They cheer it on. So the kid's like, "Oh shit, all right, cool. So I guess I need to keep doing that." And the parent knows if they keep doing that, they're going to start walking, right? And it's beautiful. It's how it's supposed to be. And eventually the kid ends up walking. Well, then they go to school, and that's about the time where we start going, failure's a bad word. Don't fail. Follow directions. Do what you got. Like follow, 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 follow. Don't fail, don't fail, don't fail. And then we say, oh, but we want them to be resilient and I don't want to coddle them and I don't want to. We're putting them in a faux environment that doesn't translate to anything else. School doesn't look like any other system we have in our society other than prison. That's the only thing school looks like. That's the only thing it's similar to. Right. So we're putting them in this weird situation and then saying that we want them to build resilience and not, we're putting them in an environment that often that says, don't fail, listen to authority, be blindly obedient, do exactly what we say when we say to do it. We're going to ring a little bell like a Pavlovian dog, and then we're going to send you out to the. So if you get outside of kind of these norms, it's actually pretty dang easy. So, we've got our young heroes. They aren't distracted by a garbage of school. They have their own goals. They're going to tackle experiences. My girl fails, she's riding horses and learning new tricks all the time. She gets bucked off. Like there's a failure that happens. She, my gymnast is on a balance beam and she freaking tries to do a cartwheel and falls off. There's failure that happens. Kickboxing, he gets socked in the face. There's failure that happens. They're out here on a farm. They're out here taking on responsibilities, out here taking on chores. If they forgot to do, big failures can happen, right? Like animals can die if we don't take care of them. Like there's opportunities for failure all the time. But what we're doing is we're just creating these habits of success. And that is, that is kind of the key. People go, well, they got to go to school because they got to realize that they don't always get to do what they want to do and that life sucks sometimes and they're going to have to work with crappy people. That's the dumbest shit I've ever heard in my life. So you're telling me as an adult, if you want to get better, that you're going to go spend some time in prison so that you can see that there's shitty people and that's going to somehow benefit you? That's garbage. You expose them to responsibility and greatness, especially as they're developing. That becomes their baseline norm. Their baseline is, I handle things. It doesn't matter if things are going wrong. It doesn't matter if I'm sick. I'm going to push forward. I'm going to treat other people the right way. I'm only going to associate with people that I can pour into and they're pouring into me. I'm going to be intentional about my relationships. You set that boundary right there. There's a saying in the military says, you don't rise to the occasion, you fall back to the level of your training, right? So that's the baseline that I'm setting for my kids by giving them responsibility, saying F off to the distractions, by making sure they have the opportunities to go struggle, to go launch a business, have the business not work out, have them learn, have them lose money, and have them get their mind around like, well, shit, okay, that is what it is. But I'm not going to expose them to a bunch of other broken people and broken systems, because if I have them up here, by the time they're old enough to be on their own and they're self-sufficient because they can do everything that they would need to do to survive, then they're going to see these other broken things and they're going to acknowledge it for what it is, broken. And they're either going to try to help it or they're going to ignore it or whatever that looks like, but they're not going to default to it because their bar is way the hell up here.
Yeah. It kind of sounds like controlled failing to an extent, but you're teaching the habits and ultimately consistency along the way, right? To just keep persevering.
You bet. And as I fail, I get to share that with them too, right? Like that's part of the learning process too. As I fail and as I, something happens in the business where it's like, ooh, okay, that was a dumb decision and I lost some money right there. I'll share that with them, right? They can, they don't have to understand fully what that is. They can just understand that, well, shit, dad just lost a good amount of money right there. And because he made this mistake right here. So what's the lesson? How do we learn from that? Cool. Here's how we're going to move forward on that. And they get to be a part of that too and see that I don't just, I'm not going to whine. I'm not going to cry. I'm going to learn from it. And again, they're being educated when I share that with them.
Yeah. I think the transparency as a parent is kind of lost too, right? Because people want to hide the bad to shield them almost too much and they're not growing.
It's the do as I say, not as I do mentality, right? That we were always running. That's hypocrisy. That's garbage. They picked that up. And it was always this thing as we grew up where it was like, there was this cultural thing where you don't talk about politics, you don't talk about money, you don't talk about religion. Well, that's led to a bunch of people that are incompetent at talking about politics, talking about money, talking about religion, right? And you see that the civil discourse has gone down the hill. And that's ridiculous. Your kids should understand exactly where you stand on those things, but have open conversations around those things, the why behind all of it, and then get them involved. Like they understand what our cash flow looks like for the house. They understand how I make money and the different avenues that comes in. They understand how that money flows. And it's not the same as what normal people, it's not just I do a job and I get paid and sometimes we pay bills. But even if that's your situation, share it. Cool. Share that with your kids. This is what it is. And so this is why we have this much money. And this is what share that stuff. It's ridiculous to hide that. Why would you handicap your young kid with that kind of stuff? They should know every single bit of that, man, and be open and honest.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. And also, what would be like one tip you would give to someone that almost was a cog in the machine, right? Like you're 22, 21, just got out of college. You went through a normal school system. You kind of followed the status quo, you followed the plan, and now you're almost lost and you need like to kind of kickstart, I guess, self-growth really. How would you kind of tell someone to navigate that?
Yeah, if they're that age, if that's where they are, what they have to realize is they've been trained and they've been trained poorly. almost guaranteed. Maybe your parents did a good job, maybe they didn't, but if you've gone through the system was never going to be your friend. It's trained you to look outward. You need to look inward. So if that's your scenario and you are 20, 21, 22, your job right now is to take on as much responsibility as you possibly can. Your job right now is not to go hang out with the homies and go look for girls and swipe on this and swipe on that and get your, that's not your job. Your job right now is to take on as many jobs as you can. It doesn't have to be your dream job. It doesn't have to be the dream career. It doesn't have to be. Your job is to, how can I fill up my time with the most responsibility I possibly can? Multiple jobs, serving other people, making sure my physical fitness stays solid, making sure you're not spending like an idiot. Your job is to do that. And that is what is going to open up the opportunities and doors for the future. And if you have other downtime, well, then dive into the podcasts you need to be listening to, dive into the books you need to be listening to. Start thinking about, where do I potentially want to go? What am I interested in? Start becoming a ninja in those fields. That's your job. If you'll do that legitimately for the next 5 to 10 years of your life, which sounds crazy because you're only, 20, 21, you do that for 10 years, the rest of your life, man, is cake in comparison to what other people have. And I don't mean cake in terms of like it's easy and you're going to sit on the beach. What I mean is you're going to have more you'll have more opportunities, and those opportunities will bring bigger obstacles that would beat you to shit right now, but you'll be a different person. You'll be able to handle those, right? Because every time you level up in your impact, you're leveling up in the obstacles that you're facing too. Those don't go away, but you become a person that can handle those. So that's your job right now. Take on as much as you can.
Yeah, I think that's a really unique perspective, because I think a lot of people think that they have to jump from where they're at to that dream job, when if you just take the steps like you're saying, opportunity presents itself.
That's it. It almost never happens that way, where it's just you jump into that dream job. Almost never, ever, ever happens that way. And
It's
if you
true.
sit around and wait for it, I promise you're going to be 45 sitting around and waiting for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that goes right back to man in the arena.
Yep. That's it, man. Get
Absolutely.
after it.
And last question I ask everybody is, what keeps you going? Like, what's your deep why?
Hmm. Um, I've got this weird freaking obsession with freedom that I want it for other people, because I know how much it's impacted our own family. We are in a position now. I see what it's done for my relationship with my wife, for my kids. I see what it means to have nobody that I have to answer to for anything. And that includes the government, by the way. I don't operate with anybody or anything that I don't want to. So my relationships are all voluntary. My relationship with people here, and they go, okay, yeah, but you're still, what about God? My relationship with God, yeah, great. I've got my relationship with God. Yes, it is not, might not be, of course it's not everybody's relationship with God. Look at all the different religious beliefs that we have, right? But I am pursuing him the best I can. I am diving into that. So I've got my relationship with my wife that I'm pursuing, and nobody else has any say over what that relationship looks like. I'm pursuing my relationship with my kids. I've got, the businesses that I'm running, the purpose that I bring to the table on that. We've got our farm here. We're self-sufficient. I don't, we utilize the store. Yes, we still utilize the store. Do we have to? No, if shit hit the fan, we don't have to. Like, I want freedom in every possible way. And I know how much that's impacted us. And I know how much it's let us be in a position to help other human beings. And I can't see living any other way. And so now it's just, how can I help other people ultimately be inspired enough to do the work to get there too? It's
Yeah.
that.
It's funny because I feel like most people don't actually feel that freedom until retirement. And at that point, it's almost too late.
It is too late. And you're not actually free. If you made yourself to where you had to be, a slave to something that you didn't really want to do or whatever for a few years, to now just go sit around and just go, and hopefully my quote unquote retirement package or the stuff I invested in the stock market, hopefully that stays there. What happens if the market crashes? You're screwed. You're not free. You're not free. If you can be impacted by somebody else or some other outside circumstance, you can be put back in that cage. There's work to be done.
Yeah,
Let's do it now.
absolutely, man. And I gotta say, honestly, I really appreciate what you're doing and your time. And
Thanks, brother.
I learned a ton.
Good, man. Good. I appreciate you having me on. It's always an honor to be asked. So thank you for having me.
Of course, well, thank you.